Tzintzun Aguilar-Izzo is the co-founder and director of Talking Wings. Tzintzun is, forgive me if I mispronounce this, Tzintzun, is it Chicanx? Did I pronounce that right? Environmental story maker and movement weaver, and residing as a settler on Mohawk territory, striving to plant the seeds of a regenerative future. Their ancestors are a rainbow of cultures, landscapes, and waters, resisting, partaking in, and suffering the violence of colonialization, migration, and the systemic injustices of imperialistic global economy. In navigating this complex actuality, they strive to understand and live their history, honoring their indigenous and settler grandmothers and grandfathers while celebrating the land and water that made them one. We are all part of the living being of this earth, the ecosystem of energy, waters, and memories that we've breathed through our lungs. We are the tapestry, and Tzintzun creates to honor all the ancestors, human and beyond. So Tzintzun, thank you also for being available for today. So I'll hand it over to you to present to the group, and then we'll have Q&A after Tzintzun is done.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Kai. My name is Tzintzun Aguilar-Izzo, and I first wanted to thank Camila Vergara for that beautiful presentation, and I hope to follow along the river that Camila has so wonderfully laid out for us, in which talking about direct democracy, talking about the rights of nature, and how we, as people who are citizens of a watershed, can step up and protect that watershed. I'm right now going to share my screen. Please let me know if that doesn't work. 1 second. Okay. Hopefully everyone is seeing what I'm seeing.
Seeing it.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. So I'm actually going to be speaking with you all today, not as a member of Talking Wings, even though, thank you so much, Kai, for that introduction. Yes, I am part of the Talking Wings Collective. I'll be speaking with you all today specifically as part of the organization Talking Rivers. The work with rights of nature that we have done has been wonderfully stewarded by the organization Talking Rivers, and I'll delve into that in further detail. But first of all, let me go forward. First of all, let me situate us with who I am and where I am. I personally grew up very far away from these watersheds and these waters. I grew up in the Guanajuato River watershed, which is in Guamare territory in what is now known as Guanajuato, Mexico. However, I now live and I am part of the St. Lawrence River, or the Ganetalowanene, the Great River watershed. And this is the water that flows from the majestic Great Lakes all the way to the Atlantic Ocean. So the St. Lawrence River is the artery that keeps the beating heart of the Great Lakes alive, as water flows to the Atlantic Ocean. I personally live right next to the St. Regis or Akwesasne in Ganyageha, Mohawk. That's the name of the St. Regis River in Ganyageha, Mohawk river. This river is the river that I am part of. And I want to acknowledge that as I speak with you all today, I speak with you as a representative of that river, because the river's water flows through me. I myself am part of that water. I am part of that river. And this, for anyone who doesn't exactly know where this is located, probably most of you all do, this is in the very north corner of what is known as New York State, in what of the north corner of New York State's North Country. But what does it mean to be part of a river? What does it mean to speak and act for and alongside a river? These are the questions that organization Talking Rivers is trying to answer. How can we honor our roles and responsibilities towards the rivers that sustain us? And we believe that we can honor those roles and responsibilities by protecting the rights of these rivers. We do this through art, we do this through storytelling, we do this through citizen science, but we also do this through lawmaking. And we have attempted to do what Camila has proposed at the very end of your presentation, in which we are trying to work at a local level with local towns, local municipalities, to help them pass laws that will protect the rights of rivers. And I'll delve into that in further detail. But to do this work, our focus has always been on stories. Laws are stories sometimes very violent stories that have been used to imprison countless humans and other than humans around the world. But we believe that we can switch the story. We can change the story of the oligarchic story that Camila presented so well. We can shift that to shift into something that is ecocentric, something that includes all of our voices. And the work that we do is an attempt to shift, reframe the story of law, specifically the story of Western law, because other nations, indigenous nations, other communities have different stories for law. And we are doing this in the context of New York State. And it was mentioned in the comments, New York State is a home rule state. Of course, it is not true home rule. The state legislator has far too much power over what state municipalities can do. But in New York State, the communities do have some power to pass their own laws. Even in the state constitution, the communities have the power to protect the physical and visual environment of the place they call home. So we do have, within this framework, we do have the power. Cities, charter cities, can even pass some types of very controlled referendums. So the work that we do with Talking Rivers and doing with Rights of Nature is within the context of New York State, in a place that we actually, like many other states, can pass rights of nature laws. There's even been a rights of nature passed in New York State by CELDEF, with the help of CELDEF in the past. But now I'm going to talk about how we have pushed forward rights of nature in our own community. We did that through conversation. We held a series of conversations about the environmental future of our watershed and our region, bringing together different stakeholders from youth to elders from both indigenous and settler communities. We quickly realized it wasn't enough to speak about the problems, even speak about the solutions, the typical cookie cutter solutions that have been presented to us from outside. We needed to create something that was homegrown, something that came from the community. And to figure out what that was, we organized the North Country Rights of Nature Symposium. This was an event that was organized, seems like ancient history now, back in 2020. And for this conversation, 2022, sorry. For this conversation, we brought together a group of youth who learned from rights of nature lawyers from around the world what was rights of nature. They then created the questions and moderated a conversation with their elders, from both the elders from both indigenous and settler communities. After that conversation, people came to us saying, we want to do something concrete. We want to protect the rights of the rivers that sustain us. And that is when we started drafting law. This is people that were from 14-year-olds to elders from both indigenous and settler communities coming together and saying, well, let's look at the rights of nature laws from around the world. Everything from the cases in Ecuador to Tamacro Barro, let's look at those laws and let's actually try to draft our own laws. Basically, direct democracy, coming together, people striving to change the system. From that work, we created the St. Lawrence River Ganyataluanan Watershed Bill of Rights and Responsibilities. This was a document that was just a declaration, has no binding power, just people coming together to say, this is what we want to see. And part of this was saying the rights that the Great River, the St. Lawrence River has. One of them was the right to support life and the flow of energy that unites natural communities within their watershed. This was something that probably could not be used directly within the law frame of a country. It was very aspirational, but just to give an idea, this was created from youth talking to an indigenous activist who came up with this law specifically. But we didn't feel like it was right just to end with the rights. We felt that, yes, we can say the rights, but the rights don't mean anything if human beings don't respect the rights of the river. That is why we also came up with the Bill of responsibilities we have as members of this watershed. The water flows through our veins that we have towards these ecosystems. This is just a sample of the responsibilities that we have in that document, acknowledging our ecological duty to advocate for the river, monitor the health of the river, nurture reciprocal relations that foment healthy human and natural communities, and protect the ability of the river to fulfill their roles and responsibilities to all the natural communities that make up her watershed. And I want to be very specific about that last component. it was told to us by some of our collaborators from the Akwesasne Mohawk community, Ganyegehaga community, that the river has their own roles and responsibilities. And what our responsibility is to honor those roles, let the river fulfill their roles and responsibilities. This didn't just end as an inspirational document. It inspired the town of Potsdam, November 10th, this is 2022, to pass a resolution committing the Watershed law to grant rights to the Racket River. There was another community that also did something similar in Orleans, New York. So we have two communities that were inspired by this resolution to pass by this declaration, the Declaration of the Rights and Responsibilities of the Great River, to actually pass resolutions committing their towns to pass locally binding laws. This, as it's 2022, it's been 3 years of us organizing on the ground, creating art events, educational events to try to convince, in this case, the local board of the town of Potsdam to pass the law. Just giving you an idea, this is going to be shared afterwards, but this is the resolution that was passed in 2022. And basically it says the town is committing to these specific things, such as recognizing that the river has legally enforceable rights, and that is also committing the town to do a review of the local law to recognize and secure these rights. So now I think we're very close, you can never know, of having the town actually step forward on this issue. The town is now forming a committee to review the law that we have prepared. This is just a sample of what this law does. So the watershed protection law of the Racket River, also called Anawade in Ganyegeha Mohawk. So this law protects the Anawade's right to exist, regenerate, flourish, evolve, adapt, and thrive, among other rights. And we establish mechanisms so that the people within the town can stand up and protect those rights, advocate for those rights. But the town also establishes a Racket River Protection Committee to promote education and guide the town and others in implementing the rights of the Racket River and her watershed. So just as to give you this is a summary of this law. You can find this law on our website. Of course, once it goes to the committee, it's going to change. But we hope that on the anniversary of the resolution passing, we'll be able to bring this law to vote. That's our goal. That's the goal of the organizers and the activists and our allies within the town. That's what we want to do. So I just laid out a picture of what our movement looked like at a local level, taking everything that Camila said in the context, of course, of the state law that is being proposed. How can the local communities act? And of course, we're going to hear, you all will hear later in today's session how this law, well, not this law specifically that I'm talking about, but the state law, how the state law will give local municipalities more room to actually pass the type of laws that I just talked about, of the work we're doing in Potsdam, New York. But now I'm kind of going to slightly shift direction. Let me just double check the time. Perfect. And in doing all this work about rights, we also have been asking ourselves the complicated question, how can we be in right relation with all our, I'm sorry about the misspelling there, all our neighbors. And this doesn't just stop at rights. As I know that there's been a lot of amazing work done at SALDEF digesting this complicated issue. The rights of nature legal framework is itself slightly flawed. Rights of nature imagines there's a distance between nature and the human right-bearing entities, a distance between what we know as nature and us humans. For the legal, and the context of the current legal structure, it is important that we actually say, yes, nature has rights, but we shouldn't just stop there. We believe that we need to move forward and say, yes, we need to protect the rights of nature, but we, humans, are part of nature, and we have rights in nature. So talking again about the current right-based structure, which we've inherited in this continent from across the ocean. Before, instead of humans having rights to to land, to the privilege of quote unquote owning land, humans had rights in land. And this has been shared across the world using different language, different frameworks in which people had rights within a community, within an environment. Human people were essentially part of an ecosystem and thus had rights in an ecosystem. They had rights, roles, and responsibilities in an ecosystem. What does it mean, though, to have rights in nature? It means that we need to honor our roles and responsibilities towards the rest of nature. It means to acknowledge that we're part of nature, and thus we need to protect nature in every way that we can, because we're also protecting ourselves in that process. So, seeing what I just said, at Talking Rivers, we thought of how can we actually put all these thoughts into action? How can we move just beyond talking about rights of nature and say, how can we all honor our roles within nature? Because we are all nature. So we thus came together to create an ecocentric pluralistic decision-making toolkit. And this was inspired of the need to create ecocentric pluralistic decision-making structures that listen to the voice of ecosystems. I'm going to break that down. Ecocentric, meaning that we're centering on an entire ecosystem, the life and spirit of a place. Pluralistic, because we're talking about a plurality. We're talking about all the voices speaking together. And decision-making, because we humans make lots of decisions, but we make them thinking of ourselves as humans. And we wanted to ask, what if we weren't just thinking of us as humans making decisions, but us as the water that we're part of making decisions? So taking decisions not as humans, but as representatives of an ecosystem, watershed, water, or all of nature. And we also wanted to ask how we can apply rights of nature outside of the legal sphere to frameworks such as art making, scholarship, and science. So humanistic scholarship and science. And how can we essentially co-create alongside the beings that we're already part of, decentering in some certain ways the human ego. And we thus created the Listening to Nature Toolkit, a guide for ecocentric pluralistic decision making. It was released on Tuesday, and you can find it on our website. I'm just going to give a very brief overview of what the toolkit does. Not going to go into detail because it's not the space for this today, but just to give you an idea what we're talking about. So the toolkit has 4 main components. One of the components is a guide, a learning process and a guide for shifting the language we use to honor the beings who are part of the ecosystems and communities. And this means shifting away from a language that treats these beings as commodities that can be exploited. As a lot of you may know, as part of the language and grammar that we use, we treat beings in English, I'm focusing on English, we treat beings like commodities. We say a river is an it. A more than human being who is not your quote unquote pet is an it. So we're saying, what if we shift that? What if we shift the fact and talking about all these other than human people, because yes, we consider rivers to be people. We use different pronouns talking about these rivers. They can be a he or she. They can be a they can be a they, because they're both an individual and a collective. So in this toolkit, we give guides on how to do this. And we also reimagine and remake the decision-making process, saying, how could the experiment was done for a nonprofit board? How could a board represent the ecosystems that they're part of? And we have models in this toolkit for different ways that we can represent the ecosystems that we're part of in our decision-making practices. We also make this concrete. We provide language that can be incorporated in organizing documents of an organization. If you are a nonprofit and you want to utilize this language, you can, of course, well, we do ask that you at least credit where you're getting this language, but you can, of course, copy and paste from our toolkit, including, of course, last discussion within your organization about how this can be used to best suit your organization. But we also offer tips in the toolkit to listen and co-create with the world around you. it's mostly just thought exercises about how you can conduct humanistic research. Not this has been done. We did a small attempt that include co-authoring work with water. We know this has been done in Australia. People, including rivers, as the authors of academic papers. This can be done in many different ways. So basically, honoring the water that you're part of, the nature that you're part of, in the act of creating science, art, research, or anything else. You can, of course, go to the toolkit here on the website. I'm sure that you'll be receiving a copy of this presentation at the end, so you can always look up the work that we're doing. But now I just shared with you a little bit of our path, how we have taken this rights of nature journey in New York State. We all need to come together. It isn't enough for people just to pass singular laws in their own communities. What would truly shift the dynamic, shift this world, New York State and beyond, is if people begin to organize about rights in nature in a pluralistic way, in which we are joining forces across different communities, passing laws in tandem and uniting to protect the rivers and the waters that bring life to us all. So I'm really excited to hear any of your questions, but super excited for the conversation that's going to be happening afterward, for you all to be sharing what you all think about the law and how we can work together, talking about the New York State law, how we can all work together to move rights in nature forward in New York State in every way possible.